Welcome. It's episode 163 of Grow Yourself Up. And today I'm joined by Dr. Emma Offord. Let me tell you a bit about Emma, and then I'll tell you what we talk about. So Dr. Emma Offord is a clinical psychologist and founder of Divergent Life, a neuroaffirming practice supporting neurodivergent children, parents, and adults. Divergent Life offers diagnostic assessments for autism and ADHD, alongside therapy, coaching, and group programs that center the whole person rather than deficit-based models. Emma is passionate about challenging medicalized approaches to neurodivergence and naming the systemic harms that arise when difference is misunderstood. Her work helps people understand their nervous systems, developmental histories, and strengths in context, with a particular focus on breaking cycles of shame, survival, and self-blame in parenting and family life. She brings both clinical expertise and lived experience as a late identified neurodivergent woman and parent shaped by complex developmental trauma and a deep understanding of how these layers interact across generations. Emma hosts This Voice Is Mine, the Unquiet podcast, and offers group programs including the Neurodivergent Identity Program, Nervous System Reset, and Empowered Parenting. And you can find her on Instagram at Divergent Lives. And all of this will be in the show notes. Okay, so this is a really rich and wide-ranging episode today, and Emma and I talked all about neurodivergence, ADHD, OCD, autism. I am late diagnosed with autism and ADHD, as is Emma. And she shared about her own process of growing up around this, around unmasking, around how she supports herself with that. There's a lot of richness in how she shared a story about going on a weekend away with some of her psychology colleagues and how she tended to herself in that. Or going for a period away. I don't know if it was a weekend. There's a lot about parenting and about how we can advocate for ourselves and our children, early signs that you might look out for if you're wondering about if your children are neurodivergent. And Emma talked about misophonia, about OCD, about sensory. We talk quite a lot about sensory and how food has got such a big sensory part in it. And I think that you'll find there's so many layers to this. So I really hope that you can find something that's useful to you. And all those details will be in the show notes. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today. I'm delighted to have you here and to have all your expertise and your wisdom. And I'm dying to hear about some of your journey. So why don't you tell us a bit about your path to motherhood?
Where do we start with a question like that?
I know it's a very big question, isn't it?
Okay, well, let's start with a kind of narrative where I was doing my doctorate training to become a clinical psychologist when I became pregnant with my daughter. And so that was commuting to London, heavily pregnant, forgetting all kinds of things because I had brain fog and all sorts going on. But I was determined that I was going to finish my doctorate because I'd given up a previous career. It had been almost 9 years in the making of me getting there. So was really determined. And then, so my children are 12 months apart. So I had my daughter. Yeah. And then while I was on maternity leave, I became pregnant with my son. And so I had 2 years out of my doctorate. So the challenge to returning for my final year, commuting to London with these two, tiny children, was a real challenge. We had to recruit all the family to help me get through that, write a thesis while I've got these two young children.
Wow.
So there's a lot more to the story, but that's a kind of good outline of how it started, really.
Wow. That's a real baptism of fire.
Yeah, it really was.
Wow. Did you take them with you to London?
No, so what would happen was my mum would travel down for about 2 hours from where she lives, and she would take them to nursery while I was on my commute to London, and then she would pick them up and she would have them for some of the day, but for that year that I returned to London, it was my mom or it was my mother-in-law, or my sister-in-law sometimes, just, family really, who were taking care of them. But also when I was doing that final year, my son became really unwell with an autoimmune condition. Just one day stopped walking. And and he was just inflamed, and he couldn't put his foot down on anything. We had to sleep like on our bodies. He just couldn't lie down and put any pressure on his foot whatsoever. So while I was traveling, commuting, was really worried about the health of my son, and lots of hospital appointments and lots of uncertainty. We didn't know what was happening to him. It took a long time to kind of reassure us that this would pass and he was safe. But there was lots of disrupted nights where every night he didn't sleep at all. I think it was every 10 or 15 minutes he'd wake. And this was for a few months. Yeah. So we were ragged. We were completely worn out.
Oh my word, Emma.
Yeah. And then he would try and sorry. Oh, thank you. I mean, we survived it, of course, but it was a trying time. It really was.
Yeah, my word. Wow, that's a lot to go through. And tell us about, because you identify, do you want to tell us about your own neurodivergence a bit and how you identify yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I always asked myself this question, when did I know I was neurodivergent? And it wasn't just an overnight thing or, before and after an assessment. It's been like a slow burning understanding of myself. And I definitely understood and recognized my OCD from a very young age because it was just so in the room. It was a really obvious thing to me. It was very sensory based. So I would do lots of things like needing a just right feeling. So I would tap my fingers on my right hand. If I knocked my finger on my right hand, I'd have to knock it on the left at the exact same pressure and kind of place on my finger. And if that went wrong, I'd repeat it. So these kind of things I know most people around me weren't doing, or at least they weren't showing that they were doing it. So I felt very different, but very conscious that this was something that I did. And I would get in lots of loops. It never got hugely distressing. I mean, at times it did. It didn't take over my life. I managed to live with it, but that would come in bigger waves and smaller waves. And then there were the kind of everyday things like that, sensory, touch, just right, feeling that was always around and still is always around. I like to have that feeling of balance in my body in that way.
Yeah. I really identify with what you said about the just right feeling. I also now recognize that I had OCD as a child, probably from quite young.
Mm-hmm.
But I had various different scratching patterns that I had to do on my body to give that feeling of just right as well.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that sensory, like, do you want to say more about the sensory bit about that?
Yeah. And I think this isn't talked about nearly enough when it comes to conversations about OCD, because a lot of the treatments or the ways of working with somebody who's maybe stuck in a OCD-like pattern and it's causing distress is a lot of talking therapy or exposure therapy. But when you think about the sensory the kind of drive or factors behind it, actually exposure therapy can be very traumatizing. So if somebody did that to me, asked me to do a certain sensory exposures, that would actually make things a lot worse. So for me, one of the major sensory factors is I have a high disgust response, and that is really linked to smell and also visual sensitivity. So if I see something that is disgusting or really distressing, I can't unsee it for a really long time. And I can't unsmell it. And it will have a gag reflex in my body and a real turning in my stomach. Even when it's long past, I'm not near the smell or, what I've seen is no longer in my kind of vision, it replays in a sensory way, and I can still smell it and I can still see. So I'm having this sensory revisitation, like a trauma response, really. And my OCD, so the replay is part sensory, but it's also me really wanting to avoid having that experience again. So it can lead to avoidance of certain sensory things or anticipatory anxiety at the potential exposure to things that will put that in my body that I can't easily get rid of. Now, if you try to expose me to those things that are disgusting or really distressing, I would just have a much, much more heightened experience. It would just put me in lots of cycles of distress. So for me, it's much more about accommodation. If I know I'm going to be somewhere where something might really trigger a disgust response from a smell point of view, I will take something like lavender oil. So I will use kind of what people call safety behaviors. But to me, they're accommodations.
Yes.
And they mean I can
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's how I make myself safe. Mm-hmm.
And that's so, it's such good information to have if we consider children who have a lot of sensory responses around food, because often if a child has a big disgust response or a response which is sensory based to a type of food, then trying to force them to eat it is absolutely the worst thing to do. And it's funny how I think that there's not enough discussion of sensory stuff in the context of food and food aversion, and how we really have to tend to that so gently. Like I've had to tend to my own children's sensory needs around food and to let go any ideas that I had about what their diet would be like. It's massively improved since when they were little.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to hold that idea about like a good mother does this for her children, they eat this. And that all falls apart if you've got any sensory stuff with food. And I think it's really common.
Yeah, I see it all the time. And trusting that child's neurodivergent body is a really big shift, I think, as a parent, because of all these ideas about what's right and healthy and being a good parent and keeping your children safe. This narrative that I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's much more complex than that. And if you don't have the knowledge about sensory sensitivity or sensory seeking, that a child might need certain kind of textures that are crunchy or, crispy or, things like that. So, sensory seeking is also part of the picture. If you don't have that understanding, you're really not understanding that neurodivergent body and their needs. And that, I think, can create quite a difficult dynamic. I've had people come and work with me, and we've traced back a lot of their traumatic experiences and their breakdown in their relationship with their parents, right back to the dining room table where they were asked to sit still, eat with everybody else, eat certain foods, and all these rules. So, it's also around the food, but some people experience misophonia where they don't like the sound of other people chewing, and that is a high disgust response. Something else I experience. Yes. And that can be really hard to sit with other people, hear that and not tune out of it, and it puts you off your meal. So, all these rules, just really force children into a very uncomfortable place and force parents to be controlling in a way that they think is helpful, but actually it's just kind of separating them and rupturing their relationship with their child further and further.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful reflection, because I think that certainly my own anxiety, because my girls were so tiny, meant I wanted them to eat certain things, but I've really learned to trust what they do. And I notice how they tend to themselves in their food choices. Like one of them likes peanut butter and cucumber. She loves cucumber. And then with peanut butter and toast in the morning, she added cucumber. Yeah. Because I think she's seeking the crunch. Yeah. And also it's so proprioceptive often, that, like what's going on in their mouth and how they're getting that safety from the crunching. And who would have thought like peanut butter and cucumber go well together, but now both of my daughters have that often. And it's been such a journey there's so much shame often around that in the context of a wider family and expectations about how children should behave and should eat. And I guess I hope that the listeners can really embrace their own children's choices in a way and see it as a way that they're trying to tend to their systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when my daughter, when I was weaning her, I think that the advice at the time was 4 months, because it changed within a year for my son to 6 months, I think, or the other way around.
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
I remember weaning her the first day, and she absolutely loved it. It was some kind of baby porridge or something like that. And then the second day, she seemed to like it. And then the third day, she completely bolted her lips together and refused to have food. And it wasn't that she didn't want it. She didn't want me feeding her. And so we did baby-led weaning. So I remember doing all this reading that, children I can't remember all the advice now, but they have natural reflexes and you can give them whole foods and they will manage it, especially if you leave them to it. So not only was she feeding herself from, I think it was 4 months, between 4 and 6 months, so really tiny. Wow. We were giving her like all kinds of different foods that were probably considered more for children than like a baby. And I'd be sat there and the other mums would be feeding their babies, and there would be my daughter, like with her head in the bowl of bolognese and using her hands to eat it because she didn't have the ability yet to use a spoon. So she could only use her hands or stick her face into the bowl. And I've got pictures of her head to toe. So I'd have to dress her up in all kinds, have lots of spare changes of clothes when it was an effort to do that. Yeah. And it was a risk. People were saying, are you sure you should be giving her this? And I said, well, she's not eating in, the way that I planned, which is to feed her. She wants to feed herself. And that's, from that moment, she knew straight away that's how she wanted to do it. So, and throughout my children's life, I've had to find kind of creative ways of helping them in their development. And people have questioned that all the time, because it's not conventional. Yeah. But I read my children well and I trusted their bodies and I listened to them.
Yes.
And I think that was really worth doing for their psychological safety in our relationship.
Yes. That's wonderful to hear. Is there anything else you can say about that? Like what that might mean for people who are listening? As an example from like your practice or something? Or I can say something.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I didn't really understand that everybody has a sensory profile because everyone in the world has sensory preferences, whether that's sensitive or seeking or avoidant or what we call low registration, where you need more input in order to process. There are all the different domains of your sensory experience. And I think instinctually, I was responding to my children in that way, not with the knowledge I have now. But I think it's one of the most fundamental areas of understanding young people because they are born so sensory. And it's, it's over time when we shut that down and suppress it with all of don't do that, do this kind of, ways of, treating our children. So I think, I wish I'd had that knowledge when I was, at the beginning of my journey to understand sensory, because you can have sensory play. You can help your children, like we've been talking about in terms of their choices around food or clothing. You can have, work out sensory regulation strategies, and you can work them out for yourself as well, because I found becoming a mum a sensory assault. My senses were maxed out and it dysregulated me so much. And all the smells and the baby changing rooms, all that OCD, disgust, sensory, it was constantly triggered and there was no way out of it. So if I had understood that better then as well, I think, I could have regulated myself and my children even more than I already did. So that's what I think is really important for lots of new parents maybe, is to explore that.
Yes. Yeah, getting to grips with our sensory kind of profile, and also understanding that nothing is good or bad. It's not like you're better if you're less sensory seeking, or I think there's so many value judgments attached to being not a bother, and it's better to not be a bother. And that kind of thing around getting comfortable with parenting the child you have can be so complex, because there's so many messages, both from within our families and society, about trying to make the child more either compliant or kind of conventional, whatever that might mean. Well, I think conventional basically means not a bother. And like I noticed with I really identify with what you said about it being a sensory battering.
Mm-hmm.
And how it's so invasive on so many levels, and it's like surround sound 24/7.
Yeah.
And how do you now? I know your children are much older now, so they probably are not like behave. They don't behave like toddlers at all. But how did you help yourself from a sensory point of view back then, if you can remember?
I don't think I was able to very much, actually. It did feel 24/7, especially when my son was unwell, and then he would wake up my daughter, and then they'd both be crying, and then we'd have that going on for hours. So it was more. It just felt like jumping from one sensory situation to another, or like one. It felt chaotic. It just felt very chaotic for a very long time. And, bringing that understanding of my own neurodivergence and learning more about sensory profiles, it freed me up so much to let go of a lot of things, but also to really advocate. So I was always the kind of mum who would quite happily go off piece with my parenting, even though there was a lot of shame and people were doing it differently. I was like, I'm going to do it this way. I'm okay with that. Not always. I would have some battles and lots of shaming looks and all kinds of things. But to really advocate strongly for my children and for myself, understanding that sensory side of things really, really helped, because I had fear of confidence, and I knew it was the right thing without a shadow of a doubt. So I think that was very, very freeing. And it meant I could walk away without doubting or questioning or feeling shame.
So Emma, tell us, how did the sensory information help you advocate for yourself and your kids, and help you kind of reduce any level of your own shame around perceptions of like difference or not being conventional or something?
For me, number one, it's because it gave me fierce conviction that this was right. Once I understood it, I could see it everywhere, in their actions, in my actions, in the dynamics between us. Like I could see where I was going to be, where I was going to probably start shouting, or I was going to, not parent in the way that I wanted to parent, because there was nothing left. And when I understood my sensory boundaries, I could preempt that, or I could regulate a bit better, or I could just quiet myself down until I was more regulated, whatever I needed. So, that was such an important factor. And from that truth and that knowledge, and seeing the difference it made to parent through a sensory lens, meant that I felt very strong about advocating for my children and for myself. Like I have cancelled plans because I've said, I think that's going to be too much for my kids, or it's going to be too much for me, or can someone else take them and I'll pick them up? Because if I have to stay at a party, or, like a soft play area, that I'm going to be very dysregulated.
Yes.
So I could make better decisions. And I could also advocate for my children's needs with a lot of confidence. And I didn't feel shame for doing that, because I understood the science and I understood my children, and I could see the benefits to them. So, I just wanted to educate people about that, actually. And in my advocacy, I would do that. And they still might not understand fully or think that that was important, but it's, sensory is 24/7. It is one of the most important lenses we could ever use.
Yes, absolutely. And when we understand how much it drives us going up and down the autonomic ladder, then we should take more account of that for everyone. That our whole world is actually a sensory assault. I know some people don't seem to register it as much as other people, but like even having more nature breaks in schools or things like that as a way to recalibrate for the whole class. They don't take enough account of that at all. I think school is a massive sensory assault. And Emma, tell us, so I asked you a general question around your own neurodivergence, and I identify also as being ADHD and autistic, and having OCD, although my OCD has improved a lot. But so you talked about how you were aware of your own OCD in childhood. Were you aware of being autistic or being ADHD in childhood? When did you become aware of that?
I was later identified. I had a really unusual childhood I've spoken about this before, where I went to 14 different schools before I was 12. And so the chaos of my life was put down to that. And me being different was always put down to, I'm in Canada, then I'm in England, and then I'm somewhere else in Canada, and I've missed all this schooling, and, there's different history lessons in Canada than there is in the UK. So everything was so mixed up.
Yeah.
And so I did get a lot of shaming from teachers of being as if I didn't get it and that I was clueless, but we could always put it down to, well, all this traveling. And
which is a lot. I mean, that's such a lot for a person to deal with.
It is.
Such a lot.
And people often say to me, because when I was 12, it stopped and we settled in the UK. And people often say, God, it must have been so hard, all that moving. And I always say, no, it was the stopping that was so hard. I can really see, like, part of what I would put down to my ADHD neurobiology, really enjoyed all of that moving and that chaos.
Yeah.
It had its downsides, trust me, but it was a part of that I really enjoyed. And
yeah, and I'm sorry, because I just did that. So I just made a massive assumption and a projection onto you that it must have been hard, but I can really hear how it sounds like it was actually resourcing.
It was an adventure that I loved.
Yeah.
My mum wouldn't fly because she was scared of flying. She had a lot of anxiety from previous flights that she'd had. And so we would travel by boat, by cruise ships. So I missed chunks and chunks of schooling. And I spent a lot of time on cruise ships going back and forth from Canada.
Wow. It sounds so exotic.
I mean, we were in the lower cabins. They weren't luxury cabins that we were in. It wasn't quite as exotic, but it was an adventure. And in a way, it really fed my neurodivergent mind, because it was so unconventional. And I have always been a very unconventional person, either by nature, by my upbringing, or an interaction of both. And so it's very hard to untangle what is your neurobiology and what is, the nature-nurture question.
Yes, yeah.
Through all of that. So the other part of my story is my father sadly died when I was 12, which is why we left Canada, moved to the UK and settled near family, near my mum's family.
I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry. That's such a great tragedy.
It really was. And he, I would say, had a lot more of my kind of neurodivergent profile than me and my mum. So I still hadn't really discovered, aspects of my neurodivergence at that point. A lot was put down to moving and the trauma that I'd been through, losing my dad. And so I don't think anybody, and certainly not in the 80s, were they looking for an ADHD young girl. And through all of that, that's all they saw, really, that overlaid most of how people experienced me. But what I really look back on now, I understand my neurodivergence is I lost the one continuity in all of that chaos. My dad's neurobiology was very similar to mine, and I lost that. And so I had a mum who was really struggled with the loss of her husband, understandably. My brother was 10 years younger, and so she had this 2-year-old to look after on her own after, losing her husband. And she had a very fiery, risk-taking teenage daughter who was nothing like her in terms of neurobiology. So like I spoke of my mum's anxiety with flying, whereas I would like to do things like bungee jumps and take risks. So she was constantly trying to contain me, all the time trying to contain me. And it's only now that she is starting to understand, and there's been a lot of repair in our relationship because she could see I wasn't being rebellious. It wasn't willful defiance. Sometimes it was. That was how I've always, sought sensory joy,
yes,
or my dopamine, or felt alive, or to do these things. And but we battled and battled again. So that, to me is so important. If she'd have understood,
yes,
and I can't blame her. Why would she? How could she know? But if she'd have understood, then the arguments and the shaming and the criticism that I received sometimes for being me and having a neurobiology that was different to hers, that she found hard to live with, to be around. So
that's such a lot, and thank you for sharing that with us, because I'm so touched actually to hear that you've been able to have times of repair, and that she can sort of look back and see that maybe what she was doing wasn't helpful, because it's really difficult to remain in touch with our parents when we don't feel like we got the support we needed. And so I really love hearing there's so much beauty in this, I observe. So thank you for sharing that with us.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And, it was only recently my mum came to visit for my birthday, and she said, it's the first time she's ever said this. She said, you're right. You are just like your dad. But until then, she really rejected that and felt like it was a rejection of her as a mother. And it wasn't. It was never, I don't like who you are, how you choose to be in this world, or what you need. I just do things differently. So that, that neurodiversity, inclusiveness is much more there now than it ever was. But it just shows, the conflicts and the ruptures that can happen when you're not understanding it for what it truly is, this neurobiology, this neurocomplexity, and putting it down to like a willful defiance or something against you as a human being or against you as a parent. It isn't against you. It's not to try and upset you.
No, it's not. And it's not disobedience. It's not trying to challenge us or kind of be difficult, because I think there can be such an idea that this is a difficult child or something. Mm-hmm. And it's not a difficult child. It's just a child who needs a different way to be understood.
Exactly.
And tell us about, so there's kind of so many areas I want to go in, because you talk about neurohybridity a lot in your own body of work. And everything you do is very neuroaffirming. Can you explain to the listeners who may not know what that means? What does that mean? And how that runs through the thread of everything that you do?
So neuroaffirming is part of a human rights movement, the neurodiversity movement, which is to move away from the medical model of disorder. So it isn't to say that, what we describe here as autistic or ADHD or OCD isn't an experience for a person or doesn't cause distress for them at times or challenges. But we're moving away from the idea that they are disordered, they have deficits, they're difficult, they need fixing or medicating. It's trying to move away from that and appreciate the diversity of our neurobiology, while understanding that should somebody be given a different environment, they might not have the challenges that they do in the environments that they are currently in. So if, for example, schools could be designed differently and have more flexibility, actually a neurodivergent child might flourish and not have the struggles that they do when they're trying to fit into an environment that works against their neurobiology, or they're being responded to in ways that are shaming or criticizing, or they feel forced to hide and suppress who they are in order to go under the radar and fit in, or they're not in school as a result. So it's really recognizing the role of environment in our neurobiology and how that disadvantages us. And for me, neurohybridity is a term that I've come up with to really help me understand how fluid we are, that in one environment, I'm regulated and in another, I'm not. With certain people, I'm more regulated and with others, I'm not. And that's my fluidity. That's not my neurobiology as a disorder.
Yeah.
That's how we are ever-changing, dynamically interacting all the time, internally and externally and relationally. And I really want to help people see that they do have influence over their regulation when they understand their neurobiology, and to help others be more compassionate and less shaming, more understanding of other people when they are dysregulated. Maybe they need something in their environment rather than they need to change.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. I just want to really validate that with that. I think because I think even at schools, the thing about everything being age-related, this is like a massive bugbear of mine, because if we simply just took away that and kind of really acknowledge that everyone learns at a different pace and in a different way and may need movement to learn, like the construct of needing to sit still. Why is sitting still virtuous? I don't understand that.
I completely agree. Completely agree. Recently, I was supporting a young person in school, and the school were concerned about the child's well-being because they had fallen asleep in assembly and several times in English. And we said, well, does it happen anywhere else? And they said, no. Well, then maybe there's something about the lesson and assembly. Exactly. So that child's off switch just hit, and they just had a rest instead. And they turned it into this worried about their well-being, as if the child wasn't sleeping, the parents weren't looking after the child. And my advice was, well, you either change the curriculum or you let the child sleep, because you cannot force that child to learn that. They can force themselves to stay awake, but I can guarantee nothing's going to be going in. And that might make them very dysregulated for the next lesson where they could listen. So you've got to take that into account. But that advice, they thought I was almost, irresponsible. Well, let the child sleep. Yeah, let the child sleep.
Yeah, they might need a little reset. Yeah, exactly. We need so much more humanity, especially in the way that we treat children, because it's one thing for you and I to acknowledge our sensory stuff, whatever that might be, and to tend to ourselves and to make accommodations and to take the lavender oil like you do. And I do various different things. Well, I also don't do things that are too much for me, and to have boundaries or various different things. But the most vulnerable members of our society are constantly assailed in ways that are just so out of their control. Mm-hmm. And it just, I don't know, I find it just really devastating.
It is. And, I have spoke to schools and parents and local authorities and hospitals and GPs and said, there is such a thing as school trauma.
Yeah.
And there's an assumption that all children are safe in school unless they're being bullied, but that the foundations in the system is a safe place. And I advocate, no, it's not.
Yes.
And it might not be a physical trauma like a bullying. It might not be someone has punched that child in the face and, there's a very obvious physical trauma. It's a very neurodivergent specific trauma.
Yeah.
It's the sensory assault of the canteen. It's the uncleanliness of a public toilet that brings on a high disgust response. It's the boring English lesson that just turns us off, and then we get told off and we get a detention as a result of that. It's not tucking our shirts in because it's all we can do to get to school, let alone think about coordinating all these other elements.
Yeah.
It's constantly forgetting our folders. You know, these are micro, whether we call them micro or not, these are, you know, constant relational and environmental stressors that you know, impact that nervous system. And because school is such a huge part of a child's, if they are in school, is such a huge part of their experience, it's all the time, isn't it? So they're constantly being exposed and re-exposed. And the school doesn't change very often. So either the child does, or they suppress and dissociate and disembody in order to be there, or they don't get their education. So they're, you know, to me, that is school trauma.
Absolutely. And what if a parent is listening and they are wondering about their child, what are some signs that you commonly see of school trauma?
So there's some classic ones like tummy ache before school. So a lot of physical manifestation of, I don't feel well, I've got a headache, my tummy hurts. It can be a kind of picture of separation anxiety where, you know, they seem fine, but as soon as you get to the school gates, you know, they're suddenly quite anxious about being separated from their safe person, their parent. It can definitely be a very dysregulated child once they get home from school. So they've been in school, and usually there's this mismatch where school is saying, oh, everything's absolutely fine, and parents are saying, when my child comes home, like the meltdown is huge, the emotions are so big, or they're hiding under the bed. They're almost depriving themselves of sensory experience because they need to, you know, get away from any
to down-regulate.
Exactly. So it's not always what people think, which is, you know, the stereotypes of not making eye contact, or, you know, or stimming overtly, that you know, sometimes people will have very suppressed stims or micro movement stims that you won't see. So then it's not always behaviorally observable, which I think a lot of people think neurodivergent is.
Yes.
It can show up behaviorally, but that's not, you know, doesn't fit the criteria.
Yeah.
Neurodivergence, it's more about the nervous system dysregulation that we're seeing.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And so, because there's a lot of normalization of what people on, I don't know, lots of different people on social media call after school restraint collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think, really, is that should we be normalizing that this much? Are we just missing a signal of something that's really going a bit wrong for the child?
Yeah. I don't know why we would ignore that. You know, it's a clear communication of a need or of something not fitting, you know, for that child in that environment. And, you know, it only serves everyone well to try and work out what that is and to try and accommodate for that child so that they can continue, also that they can feel safe in school, because so many children do not feel safe in school. It's a huge issue. That's a horrible feeling at such a young...
It's a terrible feeling.
Yeah, powerless age.
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling. And Emma, I'm noticing what our time is. I just wanted to ask you, so you talked earlier about, I'm going to ask you about if listeners are wondering about their own neurodivergence, but I wanted to ask you, you know, if we think about ADHD, that book by Gabor Mate, that book Scattered Minds, he talked a lot about how it was about stuff in his own family when he was talking about himself and his children, and about how our society is so chaotic. But it seems like a lot of the literature has moved away from looking at they're looking a lot now at genetics. But we can just say that genetics are inherited neurobiology. Really, because we in terms of what genes switch on and what genes switch off and everything. How do you hold the influence of complex trauma and neurobiology? Or do you think they're just so like mixed up like this, that there's they're just mixed up basically?
I think it's almost impossible to, to call, to have that binary explanation of either it's trauma or it's neurodivergence, because of, the growing evidence about epigenetics and, the overlap between neurodivergence and so many people experiencing traumatic responses to them and from this world because of their neurodivergence. It's almost impossible to entangle. And so the way I hold it is that, this is the expression of your neurobiology at this point in time. And like we talked about, in flux with many other things. And I actually think sometimes we're asking, we're limiting ourselves with the question, is it ADHD or is it trauma? There are definitely experiences, traumatic experiences that we can look at through a trauma lens and work with through a trauma lens. But I don't think we should discount this idea of neurodivergence and neurobiology because, I've had traumatic experiences in my life. Both my parents were trauma survivors. Yet I can't work on every part of me through a trauma lens. It just doesn't help. So, there are parts where it was very useful to have trauma therapy about the loss of my father. But my sensory experience needs a sensory perspective. Why I'm sensory in this way, we could go on and on about forever. But the fact is I'm sensory in this way, and most of it I always have been. And so I prefer to look at that through a sensory lens, which is accepting and accommodating for that. It doesn't need fixing. So, that to me is one of the differences. Like there might be trauma memories that we can resolve and integrate and therefore don't suffer the distress of. Whereas my sensory experiences are going to be here always. That's doesn't lend itself to a trauma kind of informed treatment. So I think it's important to hold them both and keep them and not kind of think we have to choose between the two of them or decide. Most people know their trauma, like memories and their trauma, visceral experiences in their body, and holding the neurodivergence as another lens is not in competition with the trauma experience.
Yeah, it's another lens. And I think what you said about the sensory, because we identify as a neurodivergent family. Well, I identify as a neurodivergent family. And my husband has had some resistance to holding that lens, in a way. However, when we've looked in detail at our food journey in our family, he doesn't like to go to other people's houses to eat. He's happy to go to a restaurant where he can really choose and customize, but when he goes to other people's houses to eat, he hardly eats anything because the sensory experience, there's lots of things that he are kind of out of his sort of area of influence or control or safety. He will always eat at his mother's house. So he's French and he's got a mother who cooks incredible food and very kind of complicated sensory things that she will cook, I think. Like strange textures, and I think that there's something about safety as well and familiarity. But when if we ever go to, say, for example, I don't know, a friend of mine or a family member, you'll have like this tiny plate and everyone will think there's something wrong. And so I've really been able to talk to him about his own sensory experience and to reflect on that in terms of trying to because at points I have tried to get my children to eat stuff. That we've both really learned to honor their sensory experience and honor their choices and honor what their body says is right for them. And if ever I try and force anything, then one of them will vomit or something. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a gag reflex and it's not helpful. So, thanks for sharing that with us about kind of the way you hold that. And I came to thinking I might be neurodivergent from observing my children a bit and understanding more about late diagnosed and recognizing myself in a lot of things that people said on social media and all different various things. And also understanding that with ADHD, it's not about being like in South Africa where I grew up, where there was this term hyperactive.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this image of being like a hyperactive young boy, basically, which is kind of a gross stereotype. And I came to see that my hyperactivity is more internal. But if listeners are wondering if they might be either autistic or ADHD or something else, what are some of the signs that they could look out for to kind of allow themselves, whether or not they get a diagnosis, to tend to that?
And I do usually point people in the direction of reading about sensory profiling, because I think that feels like quite a safe place for people to start because it's so relatable.
Yes.
And it's not, part of the language of disorder necessarily. And so I think people feel safe to let that in, because it can feel very threatening to think about a diagnosis and about, this whole language that's been built up about disorder. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a disorder, but this is the language of the world. So, I think if people are relating to ADHD traits, autistic traits, whether or not you're autistic or ADHD, if you're relating to that information, then it's learning about your neurobiology. It's just like learning about wellness. It's really healthy to explore these different areas about how you process information, how your sensory world works. All of these different aspects that build up your neurobiology is looking at through exploring your identity through a different lens, is how I like to see it. And so you start wherever you want to start with whatever you feel you identify with, and you grow that, and then you can further explore. You don't have to go straight into a diagnostic assessment. And actually, a lot of the time for late identified people, that's not always the right first route anyway, because a lot of their neurobiology might be masked, it might be suppressed, disembodied, they might not fit a stereotype. And so I think developing your own understanding is, sometimes much more valuable to begin with.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because it can be, I imagine, very devastating to be such a good masker that internally you identify with all these traits, but then to not get a diagnosis because someone else can't see them. I would personally find that really devastating.
Absolutely. And people, when I've been in kind of discussion through an assessment with people, and we're asking about ADHD and disorganization and attention, and they're sort of answering, no, everything's really organized. And we kind of ask a bit more about that. And it turns out it's become a very perfectionistic, almost ritualized strategy that feels quite excessive to them. And without that, they would experience a lot of chaos. And so they're desperately holding on to this strategy that they've developed over time. And it's things like that when you're late identified, this has been going on for years. And so it is unless you ask the right questions and dig a bit deeper,
yes,
you're going to miss that for a lot of people.
Yes, I would have thought I was very organized. But I've come to see that there's much more layers to that, and also how overwhelming I find some things that are like ostensibly very simple, that they kind of feel like they're going to crush me with their kind of intensity in a way. And that's been a real learning to kind of understand more about that. And Emma, if people are wondering about their children, what are some kind of, and I know this is kind of also a sort of a simplification because everyone presents really differently, but what are some things to look out for if people are concerned, and again, to just be able to tend to their children, because it feels like often with needs, people need permission, or they feel that they need permission to do something differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if you see that your child is very dysregulated, especially in school or after school, or, any of the things that I mentioned before about physical manifestations of perhaps anxiety and dysregulation or separation anxiety, I just think it's so important that people explore it. Sometimes people aren't ready or able to take their child down a diagnostic route for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't speak to the school about their sensory sensitivity, for example, or how they process information. At some point, school is usually going to say, we need a diagnosis to make further accommodations for your child. But you can start with doing a few screening measures with a neuroaffirming assessor, so you don't have to go down the full diagnostic route. I would keep a diary and take notes and do lots of personal research around neurodivergence and gain a really good understanding and feed that back to the school. And yes, at some point, things might change and they might want something more clinician-led, but you can begin by doing it that way for now until you build up a better understanding of your child's needs.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think that will really help some of the listeners. And tell us, how do you kind of, this is the toothy question, but how do you bring in more ease for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you prioritize meeting your needs?
That's still quite difficult, the prioritizing my needs, but I can say I've really changed. One thing that really made a difference was changing my work environment. So I'm able to work from home most of the time. And that means I can have the lighting how I want it to be. I can wear the clothes that I want to wear. Like I might do therapy sessions in jogging bottoms. And that wouldn't have been the case when I was at the NHS. I was in restrictive clothing that really affected me. Yeah. I don't have a commute to work. And so I have more time for rest. I chunk my day as a result of that. And so I might finish a session with somebody and then I might put the laundry on, but I'm not feeling I have to do it all at once at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day. It's really being able to work with my interest-based nervous system, which really finds like the everydays a huge drain. And so when I can just do them in chunks, that really helps. I can deprive my neurobiology of things that trigger it by being at home and in control of my physical environment. I know not everyone can do that. But even when I'm in other environments and are not in my control, I will take my accommodations. I will take my lavender oil. I take my sterile wipes everywhere to wipe down surfaces that, if I'm going to eat off of them or if I'm going to be touching them, that I might wipe them down or I might wipe my hands afterwards. Like that makes me regulated and I'm not going to challenge that for anyone. And no matter what their opinion is, that's staying in my life and works well for me.
Yeah.
So trusting myself and what I need is regulating for me. Trying to force myself to change, to be like everybody else, doesn't work for me. And so that's where I'm really at right now.
That's wonderful. I love hearing that. And the ease bit, I suppose the ease bit comes with not challenging yourself to try and fit into what someone else thinks you should do.
It does, and it's really reduced the mental reviewing. Like I would feel a lot of rejection sensitivity, and I still do, but the shame was huge. And, if I was criticized, the mental review would go over and over and over in my head about what a, not necessarily a terrible person, but like a useless person or immature, reckless person, or why don't I get it? Or why can't I be easier for other people? Why are you so dramatic, so sensitive? All of this, I can really let go of that mental review. It's still there. Sometimes it comes in full force, but it just does not have the intensity or the damaging effects that it used to. And I know that not everybody will trust in this approach or believe me or think that this is valid, but I believe it is. And I see the results in people I work with, in myself, in my family. Yeah. And that's given me a lot of strength. Yeah.
And what I just hear is so much self-acceptance and self-softness and self-validation. And really, because I think that core of meeting our needs, because I'm passionate about people meeting our needs, because I think so many of us have grown up so focused outwards on like being like not of a bother to people. And we really have to validate our own needs, because so many of us, I know that I have waited to check, do other people think that that's okay or valid? And we have to literally throw that away, because otherwise we're just always hooked in, So I love the way you've described that.
Yeah. And I'll give, I know we're coming to the end, but I'll give an example where I was on a kind of psychology retreat, and we were all cooking for each other, just kind of going back to food and what you were saying.
Oh, wow. That sounds very complex.
Yeah. And so we went to the supermarket, and everybody wanted fajitas, chicken fajitas, and that seemed like an okay thing. And somebody was going to buy like these strips, and I said, I advocated for myself and said, can we buy the chicken breast? Because I'm the kind of person who needs to really check the chicken's okay. And they looked at me like, what? And part of me felt really silly, but I knew I had to be in control of the food, and they didn't. And so they were, okay, Emma, you choose the chicken. And then I said, can I prepare it, please? Because that's the only way I'm going to be able to eat this. Nothing against you. This is something very like essential for me to feel regulated and calm and be part of this. And they, and they accepted it, and that's how it went. And nobody was offended. I'm not sure everyone understood, but it was fine.
But that doesn't matter. Yeah.
No, it doesn't. And I do that all the time on so many different levels now. And it's actually like, it makes me giggle sometimes to be so free. And I know I'm connected to a very safe place then, because I know people don't always get it, but I know that I need this. And as long as it's not harming anyone else, this is quite like an expression of myself that was long before exiled. I couldn't tell people. It felt shameful to tell people. The fact that I can say it now and even have a giggle about it and say, look, I know you don't get it, but you don't need to. Let's just go with it. Let's roll with it. I love being here in my body and in myself. Like, I'm loving that part of my identity that isn't feeling the shame around that can feel safe.
That's so beautiful. Really, really beautiful. I found that really touching. And I think that what you're also doing there is that you're modeling for other people that they can do that too. Like, you're fully inhabiting yourself and what your self needs to feel safe and free. And that's such an invitation to others to be in their own embodied authenticity. And we really need more people being in their embodied authenticity. So really, it's really wonderful. Thank you.
And I think that's something really important that we as parents can do for our children. So if they're not ready, or we're not ready or able to go down, a full identification route, what you do know, you can show them through, explaining to them why something might be dysregulating you or regulating you from a sensory point of view, or from, a different neurodivergent trait point of view, to give them the language to then do that for themselves.
Yes, exactly, to really empower them. Thank you, Emma. This has been really, really beautiful. I'm just wondering if there's anything else you'd want to say to, say, a new neurodivergent mum, just if there's anything that...
Yeah, I would say, you can be an incredible parent when you embrace and accept your neurodivergence, and, perhaps that, those traits of your child, and, that can work in harmony even when the traits are different or sometimes clash with each other and you have very different needs. But like honoring and respecting and trusting the neurodivergent body and what the communication is that it's providing, that can take up so much pressure from parenting and just build such a lovely bond of co-regulation between you and your child. So your neurodivergence doesn't need fixing, suppressing, medicating necessarily. It's something that if you embrace, like, you can use it to build these relationships with yourself and with your children.
Yeah, absolutely. It can lead to greater intimacy. Really beautiful connection. Now, Emma, before you go, tell us about how people can work with you tell us about the range of services. I know you do a whole variety of different things, and where they can find you.
So people can find me and my team. Our website is Divergent Life, and we're also on Instagram, and that's at Divergent Lives. So it's not life, it's lives, slightly different. And we run various different groups. We run a parenting group, an empowered parenting group, which is starting in November. We have neurodivergent identity exploration groups and nervous system regulation groups. And we do some of that work individually as well. We're coaching with parents. We do diagnose, and we do both clinical and non-clinical. If people want to have more of an exploration rather than a full clinical diagnostic assessment. And we're all therapists, so we work through a neuroaffirming and trauma-informed lens. So if they go to our website, they can find lots of information about
wonderful
services. Yeah.
And this will all be in the show notes for everyone who, you'll have it all written in the show notes, so you can just click there. Thank you so much for your time, Emma. This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Cath. I've really enjoyed it.
That's a pleasure.